Elegoo is finally entering into the CoreXY game with the upcoming release of their latest 3D printer, the Elegoo Centauri Carbon. And this might look eerily familiar to another similarly named 3D printer, but Elegoo is promising this will cost a fraction of the price and provide some incredible looking 3D prints. And I have to say, I am super excited to finally be able to talk with you about this new 3D printer and some of the awesome things that I have 3D printed with it so far. And since it's fully enclosed, that means we're gonna be able to 3D print with a wide variety of materials, everything from your standard PLAs to TPUs to PETG, and even things like ASA that require a lot more temperature. And Elegoo actually announced the Centauri back in the spring of 2024 at Rapid TCT and have taken their time with the development of this latest 3D printer, making sure that it's a refined, great experience that's going to provide some really quality 3D prints. And one of my favorite things that I had been begging them for was to actually take all of the filaments that they offer within their lineup and create profiles for them that are supported here on the Centauri. And other than modifying things like infill and supports, I've just been using their basic profiles and they've been working great so far. Also, real quick before we dive into all the details on the printer, just please note that this is not a review of the 3D printer. I am heavily sponsored by Elegoo, so I don't review their 3D printers. Please make sure to check out some of the other content creators and their content that they're creating on the Centauri and their feedback that they've had with working with this over the past handful of weeks as well. Elegoo has sent this out to a bunch of different creators to get their feedback on before it goes out in full production. First up, let's talk about the unboxing and setup experience of working with the newest CC 3D printer. The entire unboxing and setup process is extremely straightforward. You basically take it out of the box. Inside of the 3D printer will be some additional content for things like the screen and power cable and other tools that you might need, and then we can remove 3 screws from the inside that are securing the build plate in place. There's also some zip ties and a few pieces of cardboard that we can remove from the print head area. Then it's just a matter of connecting the bottom display and sliding it into place. You can then power on the printer and begin the setup and calibration process. The whole entire calibration process takes about 30 minutes to complete, which was a little bit longer than I was anticipating. However, it is fairly straightforward and I've never ran it again. And if we further take a look at the build and design of the CC, you can clearly see that this was heavily inspired by the Bambu Lab X1 Carbon. It has a really nice sleek design to it, and the outer shell is this all aluminum framing. The printer also has a pretty nice heft to it, which is great considering how fast this is going to be printing. Now, one thing that you know that I have a little contention about is the glass doors that come on a lot of these 3D printers. And I'm happy to say that this is a glass door. However, it's nice and stiff, very similar to what we see on the X1 Carbon. However, I do wish that it opened slightly wider than it currently does here. It opens beyond 90 degrees, but not by a whole lot. So I'm going to be looking into a printable mod to extend that out so that I can open the door to about 180 degrees. The glass door also magnetically latches shut, and the best part is, yeah, I haven't broken the door yet. There's also a large removable top glass panel that has a handle on it that you can lift easily on and off. It is a little bit of a tight fit to get that back on there, but nothing too hard to deal with. And on the very front bottom is where you're going to find the touchscreen interface for the printer, as well as a front-facing USB port. And yes, you can wirelessly send your 3D prints directly to the printer. You don't have to use the USB if you don't want to. And let's talk about some of the features and hardware that we can find on the Centauri. And the first one I want to talk about is how this handles your filament, and that is a side-mounted spool holder. Elegoo, thank you so much for listening and not sticking that in the back of this printer. Now, that default spool holder is going to limit you to 1 kilogram rolls. However, it does look like you could probably easily 3D print a modded spool holder that would allow you to print with larger spools. One other thing I wanted to call out is that the spool holder, you can kind of pull on it and it pulls on the aluminum siding there ever so slightly. It's not really an issue. It's just, you know, something I wanted to call out that you might see when working with it. On that same side is also where you're going to see the filament runout sensor, where you're going to feed your filament through, and it's going to go into the PTFE tube and then into the printer, where it will go directly into the extruder. Now, this is a bit of a sharp turn here that it's going into this extruder depending on where it's positioned, and I found it a little bit easier if you take the glass hood off when loading the filament in, if you end up running into an issue where it's not reaching all the way to the extruder. But for the most part, I've had no issues and just left the glass door completely on. Another thing that I wanted to call out is that when you're loading filament into the printer, it does feel like sometimes that when you're loading it in, that the filament will want to jump off the roll like this if it's a brand new roll or a completely full roll. One thing that I'm going to look into doing is extending this out ever so slightly so that it makes it a little bit easier to guide the filament up in, or just adding an extra PTFE tube from the bottom side that connects further down. And if we spin the printer around backwards is where you're going to find a poop chute that it's going to eject filament as it's loading it in, and then if you're unloading, it'll also cut it and spit it out the back. Elegoo even provides this little mini Centauri Carbon model that you can print and stick on the back to capture all of the poop that it might produce, and it doesn't even produce that much. Another thing that I almost forgot to call out is there are rubber feet on the bottom of the printer to help keep it all stabilized. And when it comes to cooling, there are multiple fans located on the inside of the Centauri. We have a large 5020 auxiliary cooling fan in the very back of the printer. Then there's also an extruder part cooling fan, and there is an external enclosure fan that can help with some of the ambient temperatures inside the enclosure, along with a nano mineral crystal filter. Yeah, I've never heard of that either, but it worked surprisingly well when I was printing with ASA. You also have access to those fans and whether or not they're on or off directly through the interface of the printer. Now inside the printer, when it comes to the extruder and heated bed, we're working with a 0.4 millimeter hardened steel nozzle that can heat up to 250 degrees Celsius in about 30 seconds and has a max temperature of 320. That's all going to be powered by a 60-watt ceramic heater. I'm also really liking that the hot-end assembly looks like it can easily be swapped out by removing the 2 screws and unplugging the 2 cables to quickly swap out for a new hot-end or different size nozzles. There's also a built-in filament cutter for the poop chute out back, and there is a silicone brush pad to help clean the nozzles when printing. The build volume that you're going to be able to print with is 256 by 256 by 256 millimeters, and that is actual print size, unlike the other carbon 3D printer that you can't actually print with the full build volume of the 3D printer unless you 3D print some spare parts and sort of change some settings in your slicer in order to be able to actually print with the full build volume that it's advertised with. And the Centauri Carbon comes with a dual-sided magnetic build plate. On one side is a textured PEI surface, and on the other is smooth. That also means that you can pretty much print with any other standardized 256 by 256 size build plate. There's also notches on the back of the bed surface that's going to allow you to easily align your build plate as you're sliding it in. The heated bed can also reach a max temperature of 100 degrees Celsius, and it takes about 7.5 minutes for it to reach that temperature. There is also auto bed leveling, but it does not occur before every print, which was fantastic, which means as soon as you hit print on a file, as soon as it reaches the max temperature, it's going to start printing. One thing that this does differently than basically any other 3D printer that I've ever worked with is that it captures 2 different bed leveling profiles, which is why it has a side A and a side B on its build plate. You can then choose which build plate profile that you want to work with before you start your print. One thing that I would like to see Elegoo improve on is the bed leveling time. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes for it to do one set of bed leveling, which is entirely too long in my opinion. So hopefully there's something that they can do on the firmware side to further speed that up. But thankfully, I don't do that very often, only when I want to work with a new build plate. And again, it doesn't automatically bed level at the start of a print, which is fantastic. And as I mentioned previously, the printer is Wi-Fi enabled, allowing you to wirelessly send print jobs directly from Elegoo Slicer to the printer without having to interface with any kind of cloud or anything like that. Everything is just locally managed on your own internal network. There's also a built-in camera in the front right corner, allowing you to wirelessly monitor your prints via Elegoo Slicer. There's no mobile app and no LiDAR or AI functionality built into the printer. It will also record time lapses for you of your 3D prints if you've decided to enable that on the print job. There's also a built-in light that you can enable or disable. That's probably the single weakest point of this printer, is that really basic single LED, and I have heard rumors that Elegoo might be improving that before the product officially launches. The included touchscreen is very responsive and visually very easy to work with, and extremely similar with its layout to the X1 Carbon. You can also expect some pretty fast printing with a max print speed of 500 millimeters per second. There are also multiple speed mode options available for you to choose from when printing. The default is balanced, but there's also a silent mode that's going to print slightly slower, a sport mode for a slightly faster printing experience, and then the ludicrous mode. Now, I only ran a very basic test with a set of benchies with each of these speed options, and I honestly didn't see much of a difference between the print times or the quality in the prints. But I'll definitely be testing out that further. Now, one thing I was eager to see how Elegoo was going to approach this is when it came to actually slicing files for the Centauri. And they've actually created their own cloned version of Orca Slicer with Elegoo Slicer, and it's a straight up almost one-to-one clone of Orca Slicer, but branded for Elegoo. And I understand from a business standpoint of why they've done this to try and make it as easy as possible for a user that's maybe their first 3D printer getting started with this. I'm hoping that we can also have any of the profiles that were created for this migrated over directly to Orca Slicer. But extremely excited to see that they have a lot of different print profiles available for this already. And that was a lot of details to get through on the Centauri, but now we can finally talk about some of the things that I printed. To start things off, I printed a handful of the files that were preloaded on the provided USB stick that came with the printer. Now, I would like to actually see those files preloaded directly onto the printer when it goes into production. The one that I think everyone should print out of all those files is the Mini Centauri Carbon. This is going to allow you to capture all of the poop that comes off the machine, and as I previously mentioned, there isn't a whole lot that ends up being shot out the back during the printing because it's not a multicolor 3D printer. This is literally all of the poop that I've captured from every single one of my prints so far. Well, technically, this is not a Neptune 3D printer, but I have a long-standing history of printing an Eastman bust with basically every one of my Elegoo FDM 3D printers. This being no exception, I found this amazing Doctor Strange bust that I printed on the Centauri Carbon in this Elegoo Galaxy Purple PLA, and it came out spectacular. This was the first large print that I did on this printer, and I believe this took about 9.5 hours. One other thing I want to call out is the actual print time for every single one of my prints has been faster than the estimated time provided in the slicer. So I'm not quite sure how that dials in further to make those more accurate, but I'm happy to see that they're actually printing faster than what the estimates provided. I then printed this Helix bowl by High-Low that I found over on Printables in this green apple filament from Everyone, and this print turned out so good. I'm absolutely just in awe of how clean and beautiful these prints are turning out off of this printer. And for every single one of these prints, I'm just using the profiles that Elegoo has created within their slicer. And there was no way that I wasn't going to be printing some cosplay related items here on the Centauri, so I found this Spiderpunk from Marvel Rivals file from Yosh Studios, and it printed all of these parts seamlessly. And I used the organic support option and was able to really cleanly and easily remove those supports from each of these prints. And of course, I can wear the helmet as well. And I figured it was only appropriate for me to print a clone trooper, that's right, a clone trooper here on the Centauri Carbon. I ended up using Elegoo's Rapid White Pet G for this print, and it turned out awesome. I did have to work a little bit on getting the supports removed from this, but the print itself turned out really clean and no stringing or anything crazy like that. Again, just kind of in awe of how well some of these profiles are already dialed in. I'm sure they can be dialed in further, but they're really great right now out of the box. I then wanted to try printing with ASA for the first time, so I reached out to Mandic Really, who I knew had printed with that previously, and he'd recommended that I preheat the bed to about 90 or 95 C and let that sit for about 15 to 20 minutes before printing. And the first thing I printed was actually a new spool holder for my Prusa Mark IV 3D printer because I broke the previous spool holder that came with the printer and needed a replacement and something that was going to be durable and sturdy. So I used Elegoo's ASA filament and their ASA profile in Elegoo Slicer, and this printed so clean, and I've been using it ever since. I then printed this Nightwing eye mask, and it took just over 1 hour to print. I then wanted to try something a little bit more difficult, so I took one of Clockspring 3D's files for this print-in-place trash can, and it printed beautifully and everything works correctly. The lid just opens and closes with ease. The wheels freely move. This just turned out perfect. Honestly, I'm so happy. I've never printed with ASA before, and this turned out amazing printing with this filament. I'm definitely gonna be printing with it more often, and the filter definitely helped in the back where I wasn't really smelling the fumes while printing with it. And one last thing that I printed was this really stylized Xbox controller stand that took just over 20 minutes to print. I then loaded up some of BIQU's HRPLA, which is a harder TPU, and then used Elegoo's TPU profile to create my own custom profile based on BIQU's print recommendations for their Airless Basketball. This took just over 70 hours to print, and it turned out so good and clean. This print looks so awesome. I was able to remove it from the supports fairly easily, and it also removed from the build plate really easily. I used the smooth side, used some of the glue stick to help prevent the actual TPU from sticking to the build plate, and it peeled straight off. And it bounces as well. As expected, this is gonna bounce extremely well. This just looks so, look how clean this is. Look how clean this is. This turned out awesome. And I know using a printer like this is gonna end up being incredible for some folks that run print farms, so I printed a whole bunch of different fidget toys that I wanted to play with. This first one here is this little clicking fries from Mystic Mesh 3D, and then Ludo has this awesome Clicky avocado. So cool. And you probably noticed me rocking this massive Knuckles glove from the Sonic games and Sonic movie. This is printed in Elegoo's Rapid White PLA. This was printed at 0.28 layer height, and obviously the texture on the print file as well as the white filament help hide any potential imperfections, but honestly, it looks really good as is. And right before recording this video, Eastman dropped a new bust, and this was for Chewbacca, and I had to scale this up to 130% of the original file size and get this printed as fast as I could at 0.2 layer height, and I ended up using lightning infill for the very first time. I don't think I've ever used that before, and it looks so good. Look how good this print looks. Look how clean this turned out with Elegoo's profiles that they built in for this printer. Honestly, I can't stop gushing over how well this is. I just need to know, Elegoo, how much does this thing cost? Because that's the one thing that we haven't talked about is, obviously we've talked about how good it prints and some of the awesome prints that I've gotten off of it, but I don't, as of right now, as of literally recording this video the day before posting this video, I don't know still what the price is gonna be for this printer. I'm assuming it's gonna be at least $500 or less. I don't know, honestly, and I'm not entirely sure if Elegoo's announcing the pricing when I post this video or if it's just the release date, which I'll definitely be doing some follow-up videos on here in the meantime, leading up to that. So make sure you're staying tuned because I'll definitely be part of the launch event for the pre-order or purchase date. I'm not quite sure what the actual plans are or what the specific date is, but we'll be doing a live launch for it. Again, please do not consider this a review by any means. This video is being sponsored by Elegoo. Definitely check out some of the other creators that are making videos on this. However, I did have some feedback for Elegoo that I wanted to share with all of you. This is all feedback that I have already shared with them, but I figure I'd just make sure it's abundantly clear to everyone else the feedback that I'm requesting or suggesting that be improved on these machines moving forward. The first being that Wi-Fi sending your files from the slicer most of the time works properly. However, every once in a while, especially with larger files, it seems like it crashes. Probably one of the bigger issues that I'm running into with Elegoo Slicer is that the camera function just doesn't seem to want to work. I'm on the latest firmware and on the latest version of the slicer. I know that's something that they're working on, just calling it out. Within Elegoo Slicer, there's also no way to directly download the time lapses that are created from the printer. Currently, the only way that I can access those time lapses are directly on the printer itself by downloading those to the provided USB. Also, in slicing and sending print jobs directly to the printer, there's no way currently to select which build plate profile or leveling profile, the A or the B option that you'd like to work with for this particular print job. The only way that you can do that is by starting the print job directly on the printer. I also really want Elegoo to work directly with Orca Slicer to make sure that the Centauri is compatible with the direct version of Orca slicer for all of those more advanced users that are out there. I mentioned this previously that Elegoo is potentially working on it, but that interior light is really not great. I'm already considering just sticking a set of USB LED light strips directly in there so that I can see my print jobs better. Also, the provided build plates, the print adhesion is relatively decent. The cool plate that recommends 30 degrees Celsius, I've never been able to get that to print properly with PLA. I've always had to bump up the temperature to at least 50 or 60 to get that to adhere properly. Also, literally up until just a handful of minutes ago, there was a fan that was constantly running nonstop. I think it had to do with the board or the fan that's directly on the board here for the printer that was constantly running even when the printer was idle and not doing anything. And I still would like that to be able to be directly turned off if the printer's not actively printing or preheating or doing any kind of job. In the meantime, you can go into one of the menus on the printer and disable the motors, which turns off that fan. One of the more critical ones that I want to know more information from Elegoo about are spare parts, more specifically hot ends and nozzles and all that good stuff. When are we going to see that? Is it going to be available on the website? How can we get a hold of those for the Centauri Carbon if we need replacement parts? And since there's a poop chute in the back, I think everyone's automatically thinking, is there going to be a multicolor module coming to the Centauri Carbon? I honestly don't know. I'm not sure if they have plans to build a multicolor system for this or not, but I know lots of people would be interested if they could make it happen and that it actually worked well. That's the big key factor. And finally, the biggest bit of feedback or request that I have to Elegoo is, this is fantastic. This is awesome. I'm loving this printer. Now make it bigger. I want at least 300 by 300 by 300 or 350 by 350 by 350, something bigger so that I can print one-piece helmets all in one go and not have to worry about the reduced build volume that comes with this size. And this is fantastic for lots of prints, but I think lots of us out here want a bigger version of exactly this. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for hanging in there and hearing what I have to say about this new, fast, hopefully affordable CoreXY enclosed 3D printer from Elegoo. I also want to say a big thank you to all my Patreon supporters for your continued support. If you're interested in things like my 3D printer settings, which yes, I will be building out some profiles here for the Centauri Carbon. You can find those over my Patreon. And let me know in the comments what questions you have about this printer, because I want to make a follow-up video answering all of your questions and printing some other things that you've requested in the comments. So let me know in the comments what you'd like to see me print or what I can help answer, because I have this on hand and can run some more tests with it. I just want to say thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye now. Oh, hold on. I should actually do this with the knuckles fist. Bye now.